Good day, friends, or good evening, or good morning, depending on when you're watching. Welcome. Now, the Word of God, Average Folks in the Afterlife, and we're continuing on with Frederick Sculthorp's Excursions to the Spirit World, part 2. And there is much nutritious information to chew on in this book. And for an early addition to the 20th century canon of out-of-body experience, it's one of the best. And I was quite startled to discover it when I did, as I've been collecting these books for a number of years and also in touch with other interested parties. And no one seemed to have mentioned it at all. And in 20 years, that's quite, I say 20 years, it's maybe more than 25. I've been doing this a little longer, maybe 30. So let me just move along there. Settle into your comfort zones and open up that third eye and see what there is to see. I have described the first excursions in their order to give some idea of how my travels in spirit started, but many subsequent travels had an entirely different character. My spirit helper now appeared to be able to separate my spirit body from my physical body quite easily. I was glad of this because the long period of concentration and keeping consciousness requires effort and is mentally tiring. I know some of you have the distinct sensation that your spirit helper or helpers are kind of yanking you out of your body when you're making the efforts. Seen that referenced many times. On going to bed, I simply composed myself and hoped for an experience. I'm afraid I used to hope every night, but this was not to be. As I was shown later, conditions around me had to be right. However, I often knew when a projection was due, and I would feel something like a strong urge of electricity up my spine, culminating at the nape of the neck, and sometimes a jolt in the solar plexus that would make me shake the bed. About this time, when having a sitting with a clairvoyant, I was told that an elderly Chinaman could be seen with me. The message says he magnetizes you, whatever that means. Later, I was able to confirm the effectiveness of his magnetizing. He was one of the spirit helpers I'd clairvoyantly seen myself in my bedroom. He appeared as a very wrinkled old man with a charming smile. When he lived on Earth, he was an apothecary. Don't see that word too often, do we? The length of time I was away from the physical body began to get longer. The consciousness was not always continuous, as sometimes I would be taken to 3 or 4 different spheres or conditions in one night, and during the change I would be made unconscious and then find myself coming to in another place. And in my early days, I experienced similar things, to the point where I thought there was 3 or 4 different me's in different places simultaneously. I think sometimes that was the case, and other times I was like Frederick, being led from place to place, and so as not to confuse me, put in a small state of unconsciousness for the travel, and then opened up again. And some of you will perhaps have experienced one or both situations. Consciousness also waxes and wanes as if being replenished by surges of some sort of power, but I do not know if it comes from my physical body through the connecting astral cord or from the spirit helper. I could agree with this confusion there. It's often difficult to tell where the rises and falls of energy are sourced from. Higher self, spirit helpers, the great sort of energy source at Cosmic Central or Galactic Central, of which it does exist. Whether you're getting energy from it or not is personally is, another story, but you might be. Also, my spirit helper does not always know what I have actually seen, because when I have visited a professional clairvoyant and received good evidence of my experiences, there have been incidents that I have missed, which seem to cause some surprise to my guides. I have heard mediums say that they are not, or only seldom taken to the spirit world, because it would make them dissatisfied with earth life. I can understand this, but in my case, I was very thankful in being able to meet my wife and yet return to look after our children. Yes, I understand. At first I began to make short notes of my experiences, but soon these discontinued as I found that I could remember more clearly and fully than anything I had trouble to put down. An occurrence witnessed during my consciousness in the spirit world is impressed on the mentality much more clearly than earthly happenings. It is clear-cut and stands out and does not need separating like the mass of thought in the bodily mind. Remembering the conflicting reports of the spirit states and life in spirit which we get at times, I began to think it would be a good idea if, as an inhabitant of Earth, I could bring back the facts, the whole truth and nothing else. The things we think in our early days. However, I found that this was not so easy as that. Many a question about conditions in the spirit world had to be answered by, well, yes and no. The true answer depending on the sphere one is dealing with. Both answers can be correct for the corresponding state. And as you may have guessed, I'm going to say that is so. It depends on what sphere or subsphere you're in, levels, sublevels. Things are, if it's a, we use the ladder to higher self and higher consciousness going through all the planes, astral, mental. And answers can be different for each level. On lower levels, you can't fly. On mid levels, it's fairly easy. And on the high levels, you can't stop. Because you're so light. You're on the highest levels, you're barely there at all. You're more of an idea than a person. You're like the idea of a person. It is quite natural that people who are not psychic themselves will ask if my experiences were reality or just imagination. I want to give a few examples of what I believe constitutes corroborative evidence, although it should be emphasized that repeated personal experience alone can bring unshakable conviction. I certainly agree with that. And also, once you've had a few verifications, your desire to have them sort of fades, you're sort of, beating the wrong bush or climbing up the wrong tree. I certainly passed that stage a long time ago. And it can be hard explaining it to others because they're still looking for it. They're still traveling through the what I call the valley of the shadow of doubt. And until they get to the other side and climb up that little hill that says, yeah, okay, here we are, they're always looking to extinguish their doubts. But asking you questions to help them to extinguish their doubts. I had no particular desire to project to earthly places, as I found the next world much more interesting. Yes, and you can do that, project to other places on the physical plane, like, anything. Mountains, lakes, rainforests, Antarctica, any landscape that you think is particularly interesting, you can project to. You'll be sort of a ghost there, but you will actually be there. I said that already. However, in 1939, my two daughters were on a holiday in the Isle of Wight, some 90 miles distant from my home. After lunch one day, I felt very lonely over their absence and sat in the armchair and asked to be taken to them. I had very little time to spare, as I would soon have to attend to my business. Presently I was projected and found myself walking behind my two daughters. I could not see the general landscape, but the girls were walking a few yards apart and tossing some object from one to the other. Then a lady approached from behind, walking through me. Now I am an earthly, though invisible, ghost, and then between my two girls. The elder girl, without looking, threw the object and hit the lady in the back. I was annoyed at such carelessness and This thought immediately drew me back to my physical body in accordance with spirit law. Oh, I didn't know that was a law. I guess it is for some people. I made a note of the time and day. My return from the Isle of Wight to London took about 3 seconds or so, it seemed. This corresponds to 30 miles per second, quite a speed for a laggard who was unwilling to return. Later, when my daughters were telling me all about their holiday, I suddenly asked the elder one if she'd thrown something and hit a lady. She reddened, and the younger one giggled and said, "Mabel hit a lady in the back with a ball." The elder one explained that after lunch one day, on the day that I had noted, while walking on either side of a path to the beach, they were throwing a ball back and forth to each other, and she did not notice the lady overtake and walk between them. This little bit of earthly travel interested me, but I don't think much of Earth landscape as viewed by a spirit. Once I left my body when attending a séance, and it happened only once. I had not thought it possible as the chairs were uncomfortable. On this occasion, I was taken by my guide to a tropical region where we stopped underneath a tree, and he showed me a trumpet full of ectoplasm, or what was meant to represent power. It was a very short visit, and when I returned, I purposely kept my eyes closed and did not move. But a very good clairvoyant, a lady sitting opposite me, said, "I saw you go out of the body, and I've just seen you return. Tell us what you saw." When projecting at night, I've often seen people in the spirit world who are still living on Earth, although I have never seen their astral cords. I think that in its more extenuated form, the spirit body away from Earth, the cord can only be seen by the progressed spirits. In one instance, such a meeting was remembered. One night I had projected and was at an anniversary party in spirit. There were quite a number of relatives there, past and present, and I saw my aunt who lives with me and also a nephew who lives a few miles away. When my aunt saw me in the morning, she said, "I went to a nice party in the night and I saw you there." Hopeful of another confirmation of this, I visited my nephew, but he could not recall anything. It seems to be the heritage of nearly all to have occasionally a psychic experience during sleep. Such an experience is easily distinguished from the earthly dreams of the physical mind because it stands out clearly, distinctly. Often I've had confirmation of my spirit travels through mediums, and several examples are mentioned in this book. Once I was standing in my shop in the spirit world, of which more later on, and found that it was one of my spirit friends, an African Negro. He embraced me, and I felt a warmth of deep affection and companionship. I too felt very happy at our meeting and ruffled his mop of close curls. Excitedly, I called to some spirit friends in my shop, "Look who is here!" Unfortunately, at that moment, I felt myself receding from the place, and despite all my efforts, was pulled back to the body. It was a day projection, and loud traffic noises had caused my return. I have had many disappointments over these abrupt endings to a projection, and they are not always due to external causes, but also can be due to some loss of power through the connecting astral cord. Shortly after this incident, I was with a medium friend, and she said, "There is a Negro here, and he says he has met you in spirit. He also says something rather strange, that he knew you before you came to Earth." This African has been with me since I studied psychic science. He has been described to me many times by sensitives. I have also seen him clairvoyantly. But this had been the first time I met him in spirit. When I have projected during the day, I have on a few occasions seen earthly people who, as I knew, could not possibly be asleep in their beds. When I mentally asked how this is possible, I simply got the word bilocation. I wrote a poem about bilocation a little while ago. I read it on the last poetry show. It's about me recovering from surgery, pretty high on morphine, waking up in the middle of, well, I don't know, did I wake up in the middle of the night or did it go out of my body? There was, a ghost leaning over me, a hooded ghost, and looking down. There was an old lady. One of those people that hang around hospitals, spirits. They don't know what to do with themselves, but hospitals are interesting places, so they look at people a lot. And at the same time, I was bilocating back to the house, tending to my plants in case they were worried that I was away for the night, because I'm very rarely away for the night, very rarely. And it was quite a funny little situation, but it was bilocation. I was in two places at once. I was on the bed looking at the ghost, and I was at home tending to the plants, which was like 10 miles away. I simply got the word bilocation, which means to be in two places at once. Swedenborg relates something similar. While he was walking in a town, he had an experience far away in spirit. And I know lots of you have had this bilocation thing. I read accounts of that on Facebook. It's more common than we think it is. We're just not conscious of it. We project. Over the years, I've many people, friends and stuff, say people are coming to visit. They'll often bilocate. They'll project a thought form of themselves into the house 2 minutes or 5 minutes before they get there. And I noticed this even in the 70s, when I wasn't nearly as, firing on all 8 cylinders like I am now. And people would do that. And you just see them appear somewhere briefly, and then 5 minutes later they would actually physically appear. I mean, it'd be a very brief sort of delicate vision, but, I noticed. The spirit contact which I began to experience at all times of the day astounded me, a newcomer to these truths. My spirit helpers seemed determined to make their presence known to me and to help and teach me in 1,001 ways. These contacts took the form of clairvoyance and clairaudience during my quieter moments. At other times during my ordinary activities, I would suddenly become aware of spirit presence and of knowing how to solve a problem. These happenings are common to spiritualists who attended developing circles, or attend. But to others they are maybe quite unknown, so I'd better give a few examples. I'd made a sunken concrete fish pond in the garden one evening and I filled it with water. Next morning it was completely empty. After my labours this was very disappointing, as I'd laid a good thickness of concrete. I came indoors, sat down and mentally asked my spirit helpers what was wrong. I was clairvoyantly shown the pond and the water was escaping out of one corner. I got up, went out and examined that corner of the pond, but it looked just as satisfactory as the rest. I was impressed to prod it with my pocket knife. I did so and the blade pierced the concrete. In laying the concrete I had enclosed a bubble of air which had set, leaving an eggshell thin layer. Sealing this fault made the wand watertight, but I could not have found the spot without spirit help. Late one year, after digging in my garden for its winter rest, I found upon collecting the tools that the trowel was missing. My deep digging had buried it somewhere. In the spring, with some plants to bed out, I realized I had no trowel. Lacking a trowel can be a terrible pain. I lost mine once. All of a sudden, I felt the usual spirit presence and knew at once where it was. I went straight to a corner in one of the beds, scraped a little way down, and there it was. In the more active periods of my life, my spirit guides used a warning signal that I could hear above all others, even above the roar of the wind on a motorcycle. It has drawn my attention to such things as a disconnected petrol pipe, an open toolbox, and consequent imminent loss of the tools. A severed rear light flex, as well as warnings of oncoming vehicles round blind corners. And yeah, I've had experiences like that. I mean, after a while they get so common that you barely notice them. You sort of notice them and you go, thanks for that, and you move on to the next thing. I mean, like losing stuff in the house and all sorts of, odd little bits and bobs. And I just assume somebody's given me a hint, somebody in spirit, and I thank them for it. Because I've long had the feeling that I don't have one spirit helper. I've got various people that come around at various times, and they book off shift and someone else comes on. And then if I don't ask for help with anything, they kind of get bored and go away. Not forever, but they're just like, oh, I've got better things to do. If he's not going to ask me any questions, why should I hang around? That sort of a thing. On one occasion, I ignored the signal as everything seemed to be all right. The machine was running well and I was on a fine straight arterial road. The signal was repeated, but I went on, and then, after a few miles, the engine petered out. Nothing was mechanically wrong, but the petrol tank was empty. At times, my spirit friends would give me predictions of coming events when I was quiet in the armchair. This happened so often I used to write them down in a notebook. One came true one evening while I was standing at my front door with a neighbour and his wife. We were watching some firemen dealing with a fire a few houses away. Forgetting that my neighbour knew nothing of prediction, I unwittingly remarked, and it happened in the very same room where I saw it. He wanted to know what I meant, and I had to tell him. The scornful look on his face at my belief in such things was comical to see. Then I showed him the entry in my notebook of the fire and the place. His face changed. He thought I had just written it down. After that, I had to show him the next prediction in my notebook, which was an incident that would also happen nearby. 2 days later, the neighbour's wife came to me and, looking rather excited, said, "It has happened." Not realizing for the moment what she meant, I asked, "What has happened?" She replied, "What you told us the other evening." Apart from earthly guidance, my spirit helpers taught me many things through my own clairvoyance, and I found their good advice true in all things. Their descriptions and spiritual status were given to me also by different clairvoyant mediums. So in a way, I suppose I was automatically in step with the injunction to, quote, test the spirits, whether they be of God. Yeah, I've used that line myself a few times. You're talking to Christians, it kind of settles them down because they automatically assume you're dealing with, the devil and his minions. And believe me, the devil's got many little minions. Oh, yes. I believe that the successful way in which my guides were able to take me on these travels was partly due to my absolute trust in them. This has to be complete and not superficial, because what is ingrained in the physical mind is automatically impressed on the spirit mind. Keeping in mind the direct effect of thought in spirit planes, one cannot see how, if there are any inward feelings of mistrust, conscious projection can follow, as free will still prevails and the spirit body would cling to the physical. My guides also helped me in my choice of books. At one time I was studying the various religions, and I once was impressed in the public library to take out a rather thin book that was barely noticeable among the others. I found that it dealt with no specific religion, but it was a translation of an ancient Chinese book and was a master's advice to students on spiritual development. I wonder if it was the Tao Te Ching, or maybe something else. I was interested to see the advice given agreed with our present-day teaching. Well, wasn't that nice? There was in this book also a reproduction of an illustration entitled "The Spirit Travels," which showed a Chinese student sitting with crossed legs, high in the air, and there was a small replica of the same form, and both were joined by a thread representing the astral cord. Ah, yes, I think I've seen that one. This centuries-old representation of astral travelling has no particular significance for me at the time, although I knew I had a Chinese guide. The attitude of sitting cross-legged as shown in the picture in the ancient Chinese book would not have suited me. I need absolute ease, like lying on a bed or sitting in a well-padded armchair, or a projection. Because before the projection, I would lose all feeling of my physical body, and any discomfort would have prevented the achievement of the condition. My single projection while sitting on a hard chair in a spiritual circle surprised me at the time, but I think it was done as proof to others, and anyway, it did not last long. I can certainly agree with that. That cross-legged stuff is not for me. I've been too stiff for years to do anything like it. I encourage people to sit in chairs, comfy chairs. I don't understand punishing yourself. I mean, keep the spine straight. Yeah, sure. I have mentioned that many people have experiences in the astral during their nightly sleep without knowing it. Oh boy, do they ever. Lots of you are out there. Believe me, I see you. I leave you alone. I don't bug you, but I come by and I see you, and you're out there doing stuff. The following exercise I've found very helpful in bringing these experiences into physical memory. The advice is, when awakening in bed, keep perfectly still and try to think back. The difficult thing is to remember to keep absolutely still. Yeah, I can agree with that. When I have been successful in this exercise, I have felt myself encompassed by an aura containing the night's experiences, which can be noted by the physical mind. The slightest movement seems to break some gossamer-like thread connecting the two minds. If it is broken, it is very annoying because no further recollection can be made. Well, as you know from last year's series of OBE journals, I found a way around that. But I'm not saying everybody should do that. Find your own method. Check mine out, but use another if another's better. Another little exercise which I have tried has proved very successful in the astral. During the day, when something unusual happens on Earth, or when there is an unusual sight, even a strange load on a motor lorry, my goodness, that shows its age, motor lorry. I'm British and haven't heard that phrase for years, decades. I used to ask myself if I was on Earth or in the astral, and why was I there? This exercise creates an inward awareness. It has to be persevered with and made a habit until it manifests when one is in the spirit world. My inmost desire was to visit my wife in the spirit realms, and my wishes were granted. I have never seen my physical body nor the astral cord at the time of departure, as at the start of each projection I had dropped a state of extreme passivity and deliberately ignoring all thoughts or sights of my surroundings, and I continued to do so when traveling. This attitude of mind, I believed, helped my guides in transporting me, because all spirit activity is a thought process, and I did not want my thoughts to interfere in a projection. Thus, I do not remember any journey being interrupted once we had started. I always arrived at what appeared to be a predetermined destination, and my instruction about a particular spirit state followed. For my studies of spirit life, there seemed to be a curriculum laid down by my spirit teachers, and naturally, as in earthly teaching, many of the examples I was shown were extreme cases. Spirit curriculum laid down by teachers. I got that impression in the early days. There were certain things that they would, I think, did I put this in my second book? Yeah, I think I did. There's little tests that they give you, and they show you when you feel they feel that you're ready for the next step, they take you on it. And if you're not ready, they don't take you on it. And you get the outline of the curriculum, maybe not the whole 9 yards, but you sort of get the general impression that you're following a path. My father, after his passing, once said to me, "Why do people fear death? They're not afraid to go to bed, are they?" To many there may not appear any connection between the two, but they are somewhat similar. In sleep, the spirit body rises slightly above its physical counterpart, but is connected by the astral cord. This cord, by all accounts, somewhat resembles the long continuous spark that joins the two electrodes seen in experiments with high-frequency electricity, and is sometimes called the silver cord because this name is mentioned in the Bible. On awakening, the spirit body, the real and eternal person, sinks into and rejoins the physical body once more. In death, the spirit body rises, but there is a natural severance of the astral cord caused by the stoppage of physical functions, and the spirit body goes to its appropriate place in the spirit world, generally accompanied by spirit helpers who help over the period of adjustment. Many people, when nearly asleep, have experienced the sensation of dropping or falling through the bed. This is caused by the gradual rising of spirit body as consciousness goes. Then some disturbing factor, perhaps a noise, has caused it to be pulled back to its physical counterpart, hence the sensation of falling. Thus a living person, whilst consciously projected, is in a similar condition as the spirit of a dead person. True. It's the little death. Not the orgasm, the little death. The physical body of the projectionist usually is in a condition of normal sleep, and some experiences I've had, to be related later, show this to be the case. When all this becomes common knowledge, it will truly be possible to ask, as my father did, why do people fear death? Something I say to myself a fair bit. As I mentioned before, because my travels became very difficult and at first were mostly to the lower spheres, or dull states, but before coming back to my body, I was generally taken to a brighter locality or sphere. There is a reason for this, as the condition of the lower state is apt to cling, and this might produce a disagreeable after effect. When I arrived on the lower plane, I would at once know the nature of the place. The spirit body is very sensitive, and one picks up the thoughts of the people there. The result is a sickening harshness which is indescribable. The most depressing moments on earth cannot compare with it, as the physical mind cannot deal with many thoughts at a time, whereas the spirit body is open to the mass thought of that particular state. However, if I had to stay a while to witness something in these lower states, my spirit helper would neutralize these vibrations in some way. On most of these dull astral planes, I am invisible to the people there. The lower spheres are quite Earth-like. There are cities, towns, villages, which seem to be replicas of existing localities on Earth, and sometimes the conditions are similar to those on Earth. They are quite solid when the spirit body assumes the same wavelength. Exactly. When you're in the astral, you're in your astral body. And things are impervious. Well, no, that's not true. You can sort of poke your finger through if you really focus. But hand to the wall, hand to the door, hand to the, yeah, it feels solid. Hand to another person, they feel solid. I have read that these localities are formed naturally and automatically by the minds of people who have passed a spirit life and expect to see familiar surroundings. This seems to be true, and also that the mind has a photographic memory capable of reproducing all the details. To cite an example, I have seen lampposts in the street which would hardly be necessary, as I have never seen the darkness of night there. Yeah, there's a recreation of that on lower levels, definitely. Very Earth-like. They are partially created by the expectations of the people who arrive there, and some of them don't even know they're dead. But a lot of astral landscapes are created and sustained, actually, by what he calls progressed spirits, highly evolved spirits, who have learned with instruction and practice to create landscapes. Yes, entire landscapes. And the same with the higher levels too. And I mean, they are modified by the group energy of the communities that live there. But the younger souls don't quite realize, how many times they've been in spirit over the centuries, and the function of people who are really mature old souls. And they realize they're in a heaven world, and they're grateful and happy and joyful and express their own creativity in small ways. But they only hear sort of tales and legends about how entire landscapes are created by thought. And it is a little hard to handle. So a lot of them avoid those thoughts while recognizing the essentially creative atmosphere that they're living in. Regarding this creative power of unconscious thought, I was once talking to a teacher in spirit, and he asked, "Where do you get your clothes?" I tried to remember my tailor's name on earth and could not, but this was not what he meant. He said, "Look," and pointed to my clothes. I looked down and saw that I was wearing my everyday clothes, reproduced in every detail, even to a small stain that was on them, and the result was of a too vigorously squeezed tube of toothpaste. Do that myself, which I had not been able to completely remove. In these spheres the spirits are in varying degrees of ignorance. Some have not the slightest idea that they have left the earth and are in the great beyond. Others have some sort of impression that they are living a different life, but it is dreamlike and not positive. These people have carried over the same ideas which they had on earth, and spirit is just as vague to them as on earth, for their surroundings are quite earth-like. Without my experiences and other knowledge, I believe I would have been just as vague and uncertain, as sometimes I have not become fully conscious at once when arriving on a plane, and thought I was on earth. Then gradually what I had previously learned seemed to filter through, and I would become conscious and know. Many spirits seem quite contented, as they feel well and do not tire, but their minds do not seek for or know of anything better, nor can they be pushed forward. The spirit law seems to be that the urge must come from within, which will happen in time. As the ingrained thought of many is their livelihood, this habit continues, and I've seen all manner of occupations: road making, factory work, bridge building. I've even seen coal miners riding on their small trucks and singing cheerfully. In one factory I watched a welder at work. His arc was a small spot of light needing no eye shade, but he thought he was welding. He looked up to me and said, "Do you work here?" I said, "No, I'm having a look around." In spirits, thoughts seem to be solidified and thus become things. Later, when progress is made, these God-given gifts will be used differently. One of our well-known psychic researchers, Frederick, in a communication after his passing, gave this state the very apt name of the plane of illusion. And yes, that was in one of his books, channeled through Geraldine Cummins. Anyway, that's enough for part 2. And I know you're dying to hear more. And we'll get on with it soon, perhaps even tomorrow. So, happy astral travels. And don't forget to ask questions, and be nosy and poke around. Because the more you look, the more you'll find. I kid you not. Bye-bye.